You know that feeling when you're all in, heart wide open, showing up with your whole self, and the person on the other end just doesn't meet you there? Maybe they're polite, maybe they're even kind, but they keep you at a distance, like they're standing behind a glass wall. And you start asking questions like, am I too much? Or why do I keep loving people who can't love me back the same way? Here's what I know. Loving deeply isn't weakness. It's not drama. It's not neediness. It's bravery. But when that love is met with walls instead of arms, it hurts in a very specific soul tugging kind of way. And if we're not careful, we start to believe that our love is the problem, when the truth is far more complex and far more important to understand. Deep love is not a flaw, it's a form of courage. When we love deeply, we're choosing to risk being seen, rejected, or ignored. That is emotional exposure. And by definition, that's vulnerability. And vulnerability is courage. We don't always talk about love that way. Most people think about love in terms of romance, chemistry, compatibility. But here's what I've found in over 2 decades of research. At its core, love isn't a feeling. It's an action. It's a decision we make to show up, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. Loving deeply means showing up for someone, not just when it's easy, not just when we feel safe, but when the stakes are high and we're not sure if they'll show up for us in return. That's where the courage lives, not in the butterflies or the poems or the playlists, but in that sacred space where we say, here I am, this is me, I care about you, and I'm willing to risk being hurt to love you well. And let me tell you, that kind of openness, that's not weakness. That's not something to apologize for or shrink down. That is some of the strongest stuff we're made of. But the world often doesn't see it that way. The world says, don't catch feelings. The world says, play it cool, be chill. Don't be the one who loves more. We're told that vulnerability is dangerous, that we'll lose our power if we admit how much we care. And when you've been hurt before, especially by people who couldn't or wouldn't meet you in that emotional space, it's tempting to agree with that narrative. So what happens? We start to armor up. We tell ourselves, next time, I'll care less. Next time, I'll be more detached. But deep down, that's not who we are. We're wired for connection, and pretending we don't care doesn't protect us. It just numbs us. And here's the truth. The ability to love deeply isn't something to fix or hide. It's a gift. It's emotional bravery. People who can love with their whole heart, even when they know it might not be reciprocated. That's rare and it's beautiful. What I've seen again and again in the research is that people who live wholeheartedly, who are willing to risk love, even after being disappointed, aren't naive. They're not reckless. They're grounded. They know who they are. They understand that their worth isn't dependent on someone else's ability to receive their love. That's the key. When you love deeply, it's easy to think you're doing something wrong if the other person can't love you back in the same way. But the truth is, how someone else responds to your love says more about their emotional availability than your value. Your capacity to love fully doesn't need to be dialed down just because someone else hasn't figured out how to receive it. You don't have to be less so someone else can feel comfortable. And yes, loving with your whole heart can hurt, sometimes deeply, but closing your heart to avoid pain doesn't eliminate the ache. It just spreads it out over time. The pain of loving and not being loved back, that's a clean pain. It's honest. It teaches us the pain of withholding love, of not letting ourselves show up in relationships. That's a dirty pain. It's the kind that lingers. So if you're someone who loves deeply and you've been told it's too much or felt like it's the reason you keep getting hurt, please hear this. Your depth isn't the problem, it's your strength. Keep your heart open, not recklessly, not without boundaries, but with intention, with clarity, with the understanding that loving deeply is not a liability. It's the boldest thing you can do in a world that constantly tries to tell you to play small. People who keep you at arm's length aren't always trying to hurt you, they're protecting themselves. Sometimes when someone keeps you at a distance, it's not about you at all. It's about their own fears. Fear of intimacy, fear of being known, fear of depending on someone and losing control. I used to take that distance personally. When someone I cared deeply about would start pulling away or building invisible walls, my first instinct was to look inward. What did I do wrong? Was I too open, too emotional, too much? And I know I'm not alone in that. When we love with intention and vulnerability and it's met with silence or shut down, it's easy to assume we're the problem. But here's what I've come to understand through research, yes, but also through personal bruises and big uncomfortable truths. That arm's length distance, more often than not, it's not a rejection of you. It's a protection of them. People build emotional walls for all kinds of reasons. Some have learned from a young age that closeness leads to disappointment, that love isn't safe, that when they let someone in, that someone eventually walks away. So they create distance, not because they don't feel, but because feeling has historically come with pain. And it's not always dramatic or obvious. Sometimes it looks like sarcasm when things get serious. Sometimes it sounds like I'm just not good at relationships. Sometimes it's a pattern of never letting the conversation go deeper than surface level. They don't do it to be cruel. They do it because emotional closeness has been wired into their nervous system as something dangerous. This doesn't mean we excuse hurtful behavior. Being afraid doesn't give someone a free pass to string you along or play with your heart. But it does mean we stop making it about our worth. When someone's not showing up in the relationship the way you are, when they're holding back or keeping you in the waiting room of their life, that's not necessarily a reflection of how lovable you are. It's often a reflection of how safe they feel in their own emotional skin. There's a term in attachment theory called avoidant attachment style. People with this style often crave connection just like anyone else, but they've learned to manage that need by keeping others at a distance. Connection feels threatening not because they don't want it, but because it asks them to do the very thing they've spent years trying not to do. Trust. Now, that doesn't mean your job is to fix or rescue them. Love is not rehabilitation. You can't teach someone to be ready by loving them harder. You can hold space, yes. You can be kind, consistent, honest, but you cannot fill in their emotional gaps for them. And this is where it gets tricky because a lot of us who love deeply tend to take on that role. We think if I'm just patient enough, if I give more grace, if I stay longer than anyone else has, maybe they'll finally let me in. But love that's earned through emotional labor isn't real intimacy. It's self-abandonment dressed as loyalty. So when someone keeps you at arm's length, ask yourself, is this distance about me or about them? That question alone can shift the entire dynamic. It reminds you that you're not being too much. You're simply showing up in a space that may not be ready to meet you. Connection takes two people who are willing, not one who's trying harder. You can't force closeness. You can't hustle for worthiness. You can't break down someone's walls with your devotion. Connection requires mutual participation. One person can't carry both hearts in a relationship. I've said it before and I'll keep saying it because we need to hear it again and again. Love is not a proving ground. It's not a space where you earn your way into someone's heart by overextending, overfunctioning, or overcompensating. That's not connection. That's performance. And I get it. I really do. If you're someone who loves deeply, you're probably wired to try a little harder, give a little more, extend a little longer. Maybe you grew up in a family where love had to be earned, where affection came with conditions, or where being easy to love meant never asking for too much. Maybe somewhere along the way you learned to carry more than your share of emotional weight just to keep people close. But here's the deal. Real connection doesn't live in that space. True intimacy can't thrive when one person is always initiating the conversations, making the plans, carrying the emotional load, or translating silence into meaning. That's not connection. That's imbalance. What we don't often talk about is how exhausting that imbalance is, how soul tiring it is to keep showing up for someone who's not really meeting you halfway, not because they're bad or cruel, but because they're unavailable or unwilling, or sometimes just emotionally underdeveloped. And yet, when we're in it, our instinct is often to try harder, to believe that if we can just love them right, if we can say the perfect thing, be more patient, more understanding, more flexible, they'll finally open up. They'll finally choose us. But love doesn't work like that. You don't get to drag someone into intimacy. You can't micromanage closeness. You can offer presence. You can offer clarity. But at some point, connection becomes a two-person decision. One of the most painful truths I've had to sit with, and that I know many of you have faced, is this. Someone can care about you. They can even love you in their own limited way and still not be able or willing to offer the kind of connection that nourishes you. That's not always malice. Sometimes it's just emotional capacity. But here's the boundary. Your love shouldn't require you to disappear. If you're always the one making it work, adapting, stretching, holding space without receiving it in return, that's not a partnership, that's a pattern. And patterns, if left unchecked, turn into self-betrayal. We have to stop confusing love with labor. You are not the entire relationship, you are one half of it. Mm-hmm. And the moment you find yourself trying to carry both hearts, ask yourself, is this connection, or am I just trying to keep something alive that should have been nurtured by both of us? Because the truth is, we can't force someone to show up. We can invite them in. We can be emotionally honest. But connection, real soul level connection, that's always a choice two people make together. Your worth is not measured by how much someone opens up to you. One of the most tender traps we fall into is tying our self-worth to someone else's emotional availability. We think if they could just see me, really see me, and let me in, then I'd finally feel enough. It's subtle, and it often comes from a good place, from a heart that wants connection, from a soul that values depth. But when we anchor our value to someone else's ability to respond or reciprocate, we're handing them the keys to our identity. And most of the time, they don't even know they're holding them. I remember sitting across from a woman in one of my groups, tears in her eyes, saying, why is it so easy for me to open up and so hard for him to do the same? Is it me? Am I too much, or maybe just not enough? And that question, it landed heavy in the room because it's one so many of us have asked in silence. The belief that someone's guardedness is a reflection of our inadequacy is not just painful, it's inaccurate. People struggle to open up for a lot of reasons, and most of them have absolutely nothing to do with us. It might be how they were raised, it might be past trauma, it might be fear of being seen, but none of those things are about your worthiness. Here's what I've learned from both research and life. Your value isn't up for negotiation based on how someone else experiences intimacy. Just because someone can't or won't go deep with you doesn't mean you're not worthy of depth. Just because they keep conversations light or avoid vulnerability doesn't mean your emotions are too heavy. You're not too intense for the right kind of connection. You're just in a space that can't hold what you're offering. We've been conditioned, especially those of us who grew up navigating emotionally inconsistent environments, to think that we have to earn affection, that if we say the right thing, behave just so, or love someone well enough, they'll eventually soften, open, change. But let's be honest, that's not love, that's codependence, and it will exhaust you. You don't have to make yourself more digestible for someone else to feel comfortable. You don't have to tone down your needs so they don't feel overwhelmed. And you certainly don't have to stay in relationships where your worth is being weighed against someone else's fear of closeness. That's not your burden to carry. And let's be real, sometimes we stay in those relationships because they feel familiar. We know how to navigate longing. We know how to read between the lines, how to overanalyze the one text message that came after 3 days of silence. It gives us something to work toward. But striving for someone's emotional presence is not the same thing as being loved. Your ability to be emotionally available, to sit in hard conversations, to offer empathy and truth, that is not a flaw. That is your strength. But it's a strength that deserves to be met, not managed. When someone keeps you at a distance, the question isn't what's wrong with me. The real question is, why am I staying in a space that doesn't make room for who I am? Your worth doesn't increase when someone finally opens up, and it doesn't decrease if they never do. That part, that's not yours to carry. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop knocking on a door that won't open. Letting go isn't about bitterness or blame. It's about honoring your emotional integrity. When you've loved deeply, waited patiently, hoped honestly, and still find yourself standing at the same closed door, there comes a moment when the most courageous move isn't trying again, it's stepping back. That's hard to do, especially for those of us who were taught that love is perseverance, that you prove your loyalty by staying, that commitment means showing up no matter how many times you're left outside. But sometimes what we call loyalty is really just fear in disguise. Fear of being alone, fear of starting over, fear that this might be the best love we'll ever get, even if it hurts. And I want to be clear about something here. This isn't about giving up on people the moment they falter or withdraw. Relationships are messy. People have off seasons. Intimacy takes time. But there's a difference between weathering a storm together and living under a permanent forecast of emotional distance. One leads to growth, the other to erosion. And emotional erosion is quiet. It doesn't announce itself with explosions. It happens in the small daily absence of being met, of feeling like you're always reaching, always hoping, always asking for a closeness that never quite arrives. I've sat with people who've spent years trying to be chosen by someone emotionally unavailable, who've invested not just time, but parts of themselves, confidence, joy, self-trust, hoping that this time would be the moment it all changed. But love isn't a prize you win by enduring pain, and intimacy doesn't bloom through persistence alone. It requires reciprocity, mutual courage, two people willing to step into the uncertainty together. Sometimes we confuse longing with love. We think that because it hurts so much, it must mean something deep is happening. But longing without presence is emotional starvation. It keeps us stuck in the waiting, in the fantasy of what could be instead of the reality of what is. And reality, as hard as it can be to face, is where healing happens. I remember a conversation I had with someone who said, but what if I walk away and they finally open up? What if I miss the moment they were ready? And I get that fear. We don't want to abandon hope. But here's what I told her and what I remind myself often. If the only way someone opens the door is when you leave, that wasn't connection, it was a reaction. And sustainable love doesn't begin with an ultimatum. It begins with two people choosing each other willingly, not from fear of loss, but from a place of readiness. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't love well. It means you're choosing to love yourself too. And that choice, that is not weakness. That's strength. That's clarity. That's saying, I believe I am worthy of being met. I believe love should feel like a place I can rest, not a puzzle I'm always trying to solve. So if you've been standing at a door that hasn't opened, if your heart is tired, your needs unmet, your worth questioned, it may be time to stop knocking, not because you're giving up, but because you're growing up. And growth doesn't always look like holding on. Sometimes it looks like walking away with grace, with sadness, with wisdom, and with your head held high. Here's what I want you to carry with you as we close. Loving deeply is not the problem. That's your gift. Your ability to feel, to care, to show up fully, that's beautiful. What hurts is when that love gets poured into spaces that can't or won't hold it. And that's not your fault. It never was. You were never meant to chase connection, prove your worth, or beg for a place in someone's life. You were meant to be met, to be seen, to be loved in return, with openness, with consistency, with presence. And if someone isn't ready for that, if they keep you at arm's length, no matter how gently or fiercely you love them, that doesn't mean you're too much. It means they're not your home. So let's stop tying our value to people who won't come closer. Let's stop knocking on doors that won't open. Let's start honoring the kind of love that begins with self-respect. Because you deserve relationships that feel like warmth, not waiting. Depth, not distance. Safety, not striving. Trust this truth. Love that's real doesn't require you to shrink, chase, or convince. It invites you to stand fully in who you are and be held right there. Good luck, and may you always choose love that chooses you right back.